Hi, it's Linda here again, and it's a lovely day outside, but I'm coming to cool off indoors. And I've got on the floor a bin of pieces of batting. My pieces of batting are usually about 8 to 9 inches wide because they seem to come off the side of the quilt. And I have different types of batting as well, but it can all get put to good use and make some comfort quilts out of this batting. But I do have to join it together sometimes, and sometimes I just do small quilt as you go projects. And today I am doing a number of things. I've got a workshop demonstration, I guess. I've got a demonstration next month at my guild meeting to show what I do with some of the smaller pieces of fabric that I have and smaller pieces of batting. So I started thinking about it today, and I thought, what can I do for a demo that's easy to carry? Because when you have scraps, you've got a lot of different things. I've got a bucket of batting, I've got a bucket of scraps, I've got a sewing machine, I've got to have 2 or 3 different rulers, and I don't want to carry all that to the guild meeting, really, for a 20-minute demonstration. So I thought I'd do some samples and just have them at the ready, and I could explain what I do to the members of my guild. So the first thing I've been doing this afternoon is looking at the batting and separating by the type. This one is a thicker poly cotton. Some of the others are not so thick. They're more firm. Like this piece here is quite a thinner, firmer piece of batting. And I thought I would put together some placemats to donate to one of the local seniors' homes. To make a placemat, you need to have a piece of batting that is about 13 inches by 19 inches. This one is not big enough, but if I take 2 pieces and join them together, then I can cut the size that I need. And so I will do that. So I take the 2 pieces that I have, and I've cut a straight edge on each one. And I put the 2 straight edges together to make sure that they do, in fact, butt right up. And then what I have at my local sewing store, I found this really lightweight interfacing. It's iron-on interfacing, and it comes by the yard or by the meter. And it's got adhesive on one side, and the other side is just firmly woven, so it stays together. So I bought quite a bit of this, and it tends to join batting pieces quite well. And it's much less expensive than the little packages that you can buy at the quilting store. And because I tend to put a lot of pieces of batting together, I can cut my strips wider, and that way it has more adherence on the piece of batting. So I just take this and I cut it with my rotary cutter and ruler, and I get strips that are big enough to go across the joint in the 2 pieces of batting. And then I'll just iron that securely to fasten the 2 pieces together. Needs to be ironed, and I can do that with a soft cloth on top so it doesn't cause the piece of interfacing to shrivel up in a too hot iron situation. So here's a piece that I So here's a piece that I've joined together, and you can see the piece of interfacing across the center of this one. And I will now just put it on my cutting board. I have a cutting board specifically for cutting batting pieces because it leaves a lot of fiber in the grooves, and it's harder to get out, and then it's more difficult to get accurate cutting with regular quilting fabric. But I do have a textured sponge, a scrubby sponge, and if I just rotate it on the surface in a circular motion, a lot of that fiber from the batting will come out of the grooves, and it balls up on the bottom of the sponge, and I can easily dispose of that. So it's not so bad, but I like to take care of my cutting boards because they're really a valuable asset to quilting, aren't they? Anyway, I'm not done yet, so I'm not going to do that right now. So to make placemats, I just have to have a piece of fabric for the back and a piece of fabric for the front. And if you have watched my previous videos, you know that I get a lot of orphan blocks from people. And so with my pile of scraps here and a few orphan blocks that I've collected, I should be able to put something on the fronts and backs of these. I have a whole bunch of these lovely log cabins, and if I put them in here in a interesting way, I don't know, I have to just think how I'm going to do it because there are not enough. They're too big for the size without cutting them, but I could put two, one here, and then put something around the outside, and I've got enough here to make a set. There's a whole bunch of those. So that's maybe what I'll do. But once I get these pieces of batting cut, then I can just quilt it with a diagonal, walking foot diagonal line, and there'll be lovely placemats for the seniors' home. Put a binding around the outside edge. But that's not exactly the purpose of what I was going to show you today. Because I'm using batting scraps, when I take these bigger pieces, quite often there are just small pieces left. And I hate throwing the small pieces away. They're still good. They just are smaller than you can make so many joins in a quilt. So, for example, here's a piece that's still kind of big, but it's smaller than I want for the placemat. No, it isn't. That was one of the good ones. Mistake. Here's so smaller ones. There would be too many joins in the quilt if I used this as a smaller one. So I decided to do something with these smaller pieces, and I am going to make sure with the two smaller pieces I have at least a 12.5-inch square. But that's not enough for those two. So I'll find another one. Here's one piece that I could use. And I have a couple other pieces that are kind of small pieces of batting. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them, but I've been playing around with a couple of ideas. And I figured as long as I have something that when I put it together, I have enough to do a 12.5-inch square, I'll be happy about that. Because I'm going to use all of my little scraps here, all these little scraps that I've got on this tabletop, I'm going to be joining these pieces together. So first of all, I'm going to think about 12 and a half inches. Half of 12 and a half is 6 1/4. Add seam allowances, that would be 6 and say 3/4. With batting, I can trim it back because it scraps. And so if I took my little 6 1/2 inch ruler and made sure that the piece of batting is at least 6 1/2, and if I have 2 of those that are at least 6 1/2, and I want to put them upside this bigger piece here, which also needs to be, it's 6 1/2, that's going to work. And then 12 1/2 this way. Then I could join them together with a quilt as you go seam, and it will then be 12 1/2 inches. That's not so hard to do. So take these two, just layer them together. Take my 6 1/2 inch ruler, put it on top, and I'm going to make sure that this is a bit bigger because I can always trim it back, but I don't want to have to add on to it. So I have a little thin strip. I think I'm going to toss that into my recycling bin. And I have one that's a bit wider, and I'll keep that one. But the thin one goes into my recycling bin. That's too small to join together. I know some people would join them together, but and here is just a little tiny sliver and another sliver. They're going to go into recycling bin. So these two pieces will butt up against this piece. And when it's done and trimmed off, it will at least be 12 1/2 inches. Perfect. So now with my scraps over here, I think I'm going to try to do something that's sort of color matched rather than just a scrappy look. And I seem to have quite a bit. I've been making green quilts lately, green ones. I think I made 3 green ones. And then the green is sort of gone. There's lots of blue and purple and yellow and red and orange left. So I think I'm going to focus on yellow and red with a bit of black and white or brown in it. So that's what I'm going to do. So what I've done here, first of all, is to pick out a whole bunch of strips that were in the pile that are yellowish. So if I take this one strip and start sewing just on the surface, you can't see there. Start on the surface and maybe join them together. Just pick a bunch of them, put them in some kind of an order that I like. Oh, too short. And when I sew it under the presser foot, I'll just start at one end, put one at one end, then I'll take the next one, put it face down on here, sew a 1/4 inch seam, and press that over so that it lies flat. Then I'll take the next one, put it on top, right sides together, sew a 1/4 inch seam, press it apart. And then I'll have a piece of fabric with batting underneath and yellow colored strips on the front. Okay, I'm going to sew that. Okay, so here's one that I've done. I sewed a whole bunch of them. So here's one that I've done. And it just has batting on the back. I've cut one side straight across, and I'm going to join that to two smaller pieces that are going to go on the top. So I'm going to set this aside. I'll take these, and with this I'm going to do basically the same thing, only I'm going to use these pinks on the surface, red, pink and red colors on the surface, and make the surface pink and red. Okay, here's a finished block. It only took about 15 minutes to sew the strips together, and I joined the two, I made the yellow ones in this case with the shorter strips because I had two blocks here, and I just joined them together with a thin strip of fabric that's in a black and white print, because there's a lot of sort of light colors and I didn't want it to show up too much. I could have used something that stood out and made it look more like stained glass, but I think I wanted it to blend in a bit more. So I just put thin strip and I sewed it to one side, then I sewed it to the other side and pressed the seam open. And that seam at the back joins together, and when I put the backing on, I'm going to, I will have all of the pieces made, and I can join them all together the same way. And then I will put a backing on the whole thing and just do some diagonal stitching, or I'll just do some stitching up and across the rows where I've joined them together. I haven't decided how I'm going to do that yet, but it's making use of all those little pieces of batting that are worthwhile. I paid for them, and I don't really want to throw them all out. So making something like this, and if I'm making it a regular size, like 12.5 inches, I can easily come up with enough for a cuddle quilt for one of the charities around here. And it will be very serviceable and kind of fun, because there's a lot of different images on the surface, and if it goes for a child or a teenager, they might really like it. So yellow and pink and red, that's quite a jolly color scheme. Now, I'm doing another project at the same time because I'm trying to get some samples ready for my guild meeting. And I'll show you the other project while I'm making this video. I have a lot of bins, because I really do try to sort the scraps I get. So this bag is small pieces of strips in a light value color. And in one of the donations that somebody gave me, they have this pile of Christmas style Christmas images, and they made triangles, but unfortunately not one of them is the same size as the other. They're all wonky, every single one of them. And probably that's why this quilter decided not to continue, because nothing was turning out for her and she just got frustrated and gave me the whole batch. So you can't just join it together with a regular triangle without having to trim every single one of them. So I thought they're not going to be very big squares when I'm finished sewing them together with something. So what I did was sort of the same type of thing that I'm doing with these other yellow and pink ones. I took some light colored strips that were only about 3 to 4 inches long. And I did sew them onto some paper, but you know, if you don't like sewing on paper, just sew them together. I find that keeping them on the paper helps me to keep things organized in my bins. Things don't wrinkle up on me, and I can store them. And I can also just roll this up easily and have a whole roll of this stuff done. But I sewed it onto paper, and that was fast and easy for me. I don't mind doing that. And you see that the pieces are all different lengths. I just sew it and sew it and sew it and listen to music on my CD player, and I just have a good time sewing these together, and I'm happy doing that, so that's fine. So what I have to do is just trim it, and usually I trim it on the back side because I know I extend most of them out beyond the edge. That one is not extended out beyond the edge, but most of them are wider than the piece of paper. So I can come along with my ruler, lay it down, and trim from the back. One side I trim, and then I turn it to the front. And when I have one side trimmed, I can cut the front because I can see where all the jagged edges are. I don't need to have paper behind it to sew. And in fact, I like to have my edges extend out beyond the end. So when I sew, I don't sew through the paper. It's easier that way for me to take the paper off. So what I'm doing with them is these Christmas squares, again, they're a little wonky. I'm not getting very easily done. So what I'm doing is I measured a strip of my paper roll, and I found the center, and I found the sort of center of these triangles, and I am sewing one square to either side of a strip. And then what I'm doing with that is I'm trimming it to, in this case, I'm trimming it to 8.5 inches. So I think originally these triangles should have made a 7.5 inch square once they were sewn to their counterpart. But because they were a little crooked, they wouldn't have worked for that. They would have been a smaller square. But by sewing a piece of extra fabric on the diagonal, I can make squares that are a fairly decent size, and it will be easy enough to sew them together quite quickly in an up and down pattern. And I think once I get them all sewn together, I've got a whole pile of these, so once I get them all sewn together, I think that will be quite a nice quilt. The light pathway up the center, making big diamond shapes. So that's going to use up a lot of these strips. I'm using the light value ones for this out of my big pile here, and in the other project I'm using the yellow and red ones. See up on the wall there, I have one lonely square up on the wall that I've already finished. But it will be joined soon by a whole bunch of others, don't worry. And I'll have this pile wrangled, pretty much wrangled. at the end of it. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm working on all of these little scraps. Anyway, I'm looking at all these little scraps and deciding what to do with them and just having a blast sewing all this stuff together. It's really fun. And time to turn my music back on and time to put the fan back on. I turned the fan off so I could talk on this so the fan didn't interfere with the noise. All right, check in with me later. I'll show a picture on my next video of what I'm doing. Bye.